but I never tried.
Very good. You've used a conibear trap, but you've never trapped a
I was
Furbear.
forced to in my wildlife damage management class.
Forced to, against your will. I'm so sorry.
They
Okay.
scare me.
Yeah, they are scary. Use a 110. Okay. You're a delicate flower. You can use a 110. It'll just break a pinky or something. Sure, sure. Absolutely. Okay. And who has used a foothold trap before? Good. Awesome. So just so you guys know, I think you probably do know that generally in our profession, the percentage of new folks entering the profession who have trapped, who have used conibears and foothold traps is diminishing rapidly, and professionals are dismayed at the loss of that skill. In our culture today, that experience, and they greatly value people who not just who know what it is and how to use it, but who have grown up or lived a life where they've had call to or reason to or the experience of using it. So that experience is valuable to a lot of folks. All right, so let's talk Furbearers, shall we? Species accounts. I have several slides to get through. I'm going to do it just like we did the other ones, okay? What is this a picture of? A coyote and a gray wolf. That's right. So this is a coyote in the foreground. That name, coyote, is according to Gary Cook, a retired wildlife biologist with TWRA, was the Native American word, and it was actually pronounced coyote or something like that, or coyote, and it was Looney Tunes who bastardized the name by making it rhyme with Wile E. Coyote. And so coyote is what we often call them now, but it's not the original pronunciation. But it is what it is. They're widely distributed. Of the Furbearers we're going to talk about, this might be the most widely distributed of the Furbearers. Didn't used to have them much in the eastern United States. They were controlled. Wolves kill them, and coyotes will kill foxes. Okay, so they were controlled by wolves, and to a degree red wolves. But as we got rid of those species, coyotes' range expanded. Right. So 15 to 45 pounds. They're monogamous, somewhat lifetime monogamous. They can have very large litters, well over a dozen, but usually around half a dozen. They're omnivores, so they're generalists. So there are selected species. Their diet is mostly mammals, a lot of small mammals, but they also eat insects and birds and berries and vegetation. They're opportunistic, all sorts of stuff. They'll scavenge, all sorts. They typically hunt alone. They will hunt in packs, and those packs usually are family units. And once those family units break up, then they're alone. So I think a lot of the lore that's out there about coyotes, hunting in large packs and such is contrived. It's not real. But they do, and they can, and they will eat your cat. They will attack and eat your dog if they have an opportunity to at times. They're not aggressive typically to humans at all. They're abundant and often considered a nuisance. Coyotes, won't eat cows. They might attack a calf, but a cow often can fight off a coyote. Same with deer. They typically won't attack and eat and kill an adult deer, but they might take a fawn. So that's that. The other canids are the foxes, and the big one on the bottom left is a gray fox. I'm sure most of you have seen foxes, and you know that there's a lot of variation in the pelage coloration of the gray foxes. Gray foxes can look a lot like red foxes, okay? The two easiest, quickest, automatic way to tell them apart is the red fox has a white tail and the gray fox doesn't. The tip of its tail is usually black, and the red fox has black on the front of its forelegs, and the gray fox does not. There's other characteristics, but that's the quickest, easiest way. Just look at those forelegs, look at that tail tip, and you're there.
What was in the forelegs? The colors, the white?
The red fox has black on the forelegs. Yeah, and the gray fox does. Well, I'll talk about the gray fox first. When my son was 6, he was very proud, and I kind of was too, that he, do you remember this story? Yeah, so I've told it before. Should I not tell it again?
Oh, like you haven't said it this class. I just remember it from 2, 4.
Yeah, I was very proud. He could burp the scientific name of the gray fox. He was very proud of that. Big scientific name for a 6-year-old. How many of you are going to go home and try it? Okay.
I figured you got showers right now.
No, I could. It's been a while, yeah. But, so the gray fox is more of a southern species. They don't get up very far north. The red fox is more of a northern species. The gray fox you see goes on down into Central America, okay? But we have it pretty ubiquitous throughout the United States, except for a bit of the Pacific Northwest. They do come up in the Coast Range, but not the northern Intermountain West so much. 8 to 15 pounds. The canids tend to be monogamous, half a dozen or so young. They're solitary hunters. They're omnivores, like the coyotes, like the other canids. Pretty broad diet: rabbits, voles, shrews, birds, fruit, vegetables. So they're opportunistic. They're considered relatively abundant. They are a game species across much of their range. How many of you knew that gray foxes, to a degree, can climb trees? It's pretty cool. They'll den in hollow trees and stumps. They'll use burrows of other species. Pretty adaptable species.
If a species, technically, like I guess more generals of mammals, like if they're omnivorous, does that usually tend to give the idea that they usually are opportunistic feeders? Are they kind of similar or not always?
Just even by definition, to a degree, they're more opportunistic than a felid, a cat, which is completely carnivorous. So I think it's all relative, but to a degree, yeah, I would say. So the red fox, Vulpes. Its range is, as you see, more northern. It's in the eastern United States and a bit of the west, and on up into Canada, Alaska, but not in Central America. So the red fox is the same species that they have in Europe, the classic tradition of fox hunting that they did in Britain with horses and hounds, that in Britain has become frowned upon. I don't know if it's outlawed now, but there's a lot of protest against the cruelty to foxes of fox hunting. But it was a species that, when the ice ages retreated thousands of years ago, the biogeographic range of the red fox retreated with it. It went northward. But when European settlers came back to the United States, they put red fox back in the southeast. Some people suggest that the red fox was still here. Other people suggest it was gone and we put it back. I don't know. But it's an interesting question. It's a philosophical question and it doesn't really matter, but it's an interesting, should we consider it a native species or not? It used to be, then it wasn't, maybe. And then we put it back, or maybe it was already here. I don't know. Similar to the gray fox, 5 to 22 pounds, mostly monogamous, half a dozen to a dozen young, generalist omnivores. Mostly they eat rodents. Red foxes often have a pretty high tolerance for human habitation. So it's not too uncommon for people in communities and suburbia to have red foxes in the neighborhood, and they'll come around right up into the backyard and kind of watch with curiosity. You're nodding. Have you seen that?
There's a neighborhood in Nashville that is full of them.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Right.
When
Pretty
I
cool.
was in near my house, we used to feed them pizza. We had them feed them pizza out of the car window, and they come up and step up on the car.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Neat animal. They tend to use more open habitat than gray foxes, and where the two interact, usually gray foxes win the fight. Okay, gray foxes play the hawk, and these guys retreat or get killed sometimes. And they don't climb trees. Red foxes don't climb trees. Okay, we here in Tennessee have the bobcat, Lynx rufus, similar to the Canada lynx. The Canada lynx is a larger cat. It has tufts of hair on the tips of its ears. It has usually this more fur on its face, and these huge feet that serve kind of like snowshoes, much bigger than a bobcat. Its range is pretty close to the range of the United States. It dips a little bit into Mexico and a little bit into Canada, but pretty much centered on the 48 states. Not so much, for whatever reason, in the New England states. 13 to 30 pounds, like most of the felids, promiscuous, okay, and the rabbits and some of the rodents. Half a dozen or so young. They are often considered kind of an edge species. So soft edges are good for bobcats. Soft edges are great for rodents and small mammals and rabbits, and they're good for bobcats. And rabbits is their preferred food. They'll eat other foods too, but rabbits is the preferred. They'll eat birds and small mammals, but rabbits is historically their primary food. They're considered stable, but they've never been considered abundant. So some people call them rare, but not declining, not endangered, not even a GCN species, just low abundance. And that's going to happen where you have a straight carnivore. You know, it just takes more land to support one, and if they're territorial, there's not going to be high density. They're pretty big for a cat, twice the size of a house cat, and they're active mostly at dusk or dawn. River otter, Lontra canadensis. We're into out of the canids and felids and into the mustelids, yeah, the Mustelidae family, right? So this is a pretty northern species, the United States, all through the boreal forest and into Alaska. It's pretty common, not in the desert Southwest. 11 to 30 pounds, polygynous, 1 to 5 young. Their habitat is mostly along rivers, but these guys will move long distances from one river valley or corridor to another. A friend of mine in grad school, Mary Miller, was studying these guys in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and she had radio transmitters implanted on them, and she located one on a mountaintop. It had come out of one river drainage, up over the top of the mountain, was headed down towards the next river drainage, like over 1,000 feet increase in elevation. So we think of these guys as riparian species, but they don't hesitate to leave the riparian to go to a new place. They're piscivorous, which means what? They're fish eaters, right? And this is interesting. There's a lot of anglers who say and have always said that these guys eat game fish. Their primary diet is not game fish. It's usually, Tennessee has 300 species of fish. They're eating mostly non-game fish. But I'm hearing more and more from folks who own farm ponds who say that a couple of otters can come into a small farm pond, spend a few days, and really do a number on their game fish. A farm pond that doesn't have other species of fish, they're eating what you've stocked, right? So that potentially could be a thing. But given their choice in a river system, they're going to eat a lot of small non-game fish. They're recovering from past exploitation, and that exploitation is direct, as well as these guys are very sensitive to water quality. So past water quality issues had a big impact on them. The Clean Water Act has done a lot of good for these guys. Clean Water Act hasn't cleaned up our waters anywhere near as much as we want it to. It's about 70% of its goals. So our waters aren't clean, but they're a lot cleaner. An interesting thing about this and some of the other mustelids is that the females delay implantation. So after they mate, they wait several months before they implant the egg, and I think on average they say birth occurs 9 to 12 months after mating. So they mate typically like in December through March, and they'll have young the next late winter or spring. March, April, or December through May, something like that. But it's the next spring before they have their young nearly full year. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, you've heard me talk about the fisher as a species that we found a record of a fur cell of a fisher in East Tennessee. So we think we used to have fishers in East Tennessee, maybe, and as the glaciers receded, the fishers receded too. Maybe they stuck around for a little while, but we eventually lost them. We don't know. We don't know if we ever had them in Tennessee. But a biologist in Region 3, TWRA, several years ago, 20 years ago, made a contact with a biologist up in Wisconsin or Minnesota who wanted turkeys. We had turkeys, and they said, let's do a swap. And they swapped, I think, a couple dozen or so of each. And they put them on Catoosa Wildlife Management Area up on the Cumberland Plateau. And for a couple of years, they put transmitters on a few. A grad student at Tennessee Tech monitored them, and just not much was happening. These are K-selected, very secretive, cryptic species. They live in an old forest, interior old forest. They're sensitive to human presence, and they were just plugging along, and the transmitters had their life, finished their life, and these guys, we don't know if they found each other and mated and had young, if they're still there or not. We just don't know. So it's a neat species. This is a more northern species. We see it in New England, in the Great Lakes states, and across the boreal forest of Canada.
Where did you say we got them from?
I think it was a biologist in Wisconsin or Minnesota, I think. Right up in there somewhere. So 4 to 11 pounds, polygynous, 3 or 4 young. It's a K-selected species, so not very many young. Insulated mature forest. They like a forest with a lot of coarse woody debris. In the main part of their range, they're feeding on things like snowshoe hare and porcupine and mushrooms and fruits. They're omnivorous. So, of course, we don't have a lot of those species down here. They are a fur-bearer species in the north, but nobody's trapped any in Tennessee that I know of. They den in trees. They're crepuscular, and like the otter, the females delay implantation. About 25 years ago, we had a freshman who said, "What's the scientific name of a striped skunk, Dr. Feller?" I said, Methodist, and he said, Methodist? That's going to be easy to remember. And I was a member of the Methodist Church at the time. I didn't know if I should be offended or not, but anyway. But there's if you've seen many skunks, there's a lot of variation in their pelage. Have you guys seen that variation?
We saw a solid black one this summer.
A solid black one, yeah, and sometimes they'll be solid white. So there's tremendous amount of variation, which is really cool.
Yeah. Skunk on the football field this morning.
Several years ago, Dr. David Pitts, who is our retired ornithology professor before Dr. Wilkins, he's still here in town. As a matter of fact, I saw him a couple days ago. I think he went to a football game and he saw several skunks hanging out around like the dumpsters and the trash, and he was looking at the difference in the pelage, and he started taking pictures of them. And he gets on a tear, and so he decided, I'm gonna do it. So he just, over the course of the next several weeks, he was taking pictures of every skunk he could see over there. And he gave me a notebook full of pictures. And he said, see if you can figure out how many skunks there were. I was going through looking at the variation in the pelage, and it was I don't know, I think it was over a dozen different skunks, just that I could identify from the pelage. So it was really interesting. So that's an example of how you can use pelage as a mark, without having to have a mark in it. That's really neat. So they're widely distributed in the United States. They don't do super well in the desert, but they do okay on into Mexico and throughout the boreal forest. So it's a pretty well established species in North America. 2 pounds up to 14. I'd like to say a 14-pound skunk. That would be a hoss. Usually half a dozen young. Harem defense polygyny. One male defends a harem of females. Half a dozen young, like I say, generalists, omnivores. They eat mice, eggs, carrion, insects, grubs, berries. They're common. They're crepuscular. Males den alone. Females usually den together. Skunks exhibit, like bears, torpor, which is not a full winter hibernation, as you know, but a partial hibernation. They'll go into a deeply lowered metabolic state, but during some periods of warmer times in the winter, they might get up and forage around a little bit.
They swim.
Yes, they do, yeah, yeah.
They scared the daylights out of us over the summer.
Really, did they?
Multiple times.
That's pretty fun.
We run into them and they're just swimming across. It's scary. Because you're like sitting there worried about trying to pick a bat out of the net. And you hear something beside you and you look over and there's a skunk sitting there.
But they're pretty docile little guys.
I just didn't realize they swam. I was just like, freaking me out.
Well, most
Yes, they
animals
do
do.
care.
Most animals do swim.
Yeah.
Yeah, box turtles and
It's got two forks
skunks,
for comfort.
chickens. Yeah, that.
Box
They do. Yeah. Actually, they just walk along the bottom. They can hold their breath for a long time. The long-tailed weasel is a cool little species that is termed common, but I don't think I've ever seen one. I don't think I've ever seen a weasel of any species, and we have 3 in North America: the long-tailed, the short-tailed, and the least. Yeah.
I think I might have seen one night when I was
Really?
taking my cousin to work. It's either that or a mink or a squirrel. But it was hard. It was different from a squirrel.
I've talked to a lot of people who said, I saw one along the river and it was about that big. And I'm like, yeah, you saw a mink. And it's like, I got a picture of one right here. It's like, yeah, that's a mink. But it could have been one. It's very, very cool. Yeah. These are little mammals. In the north, they'll turn white in the winter, which is really beautiful. So they're a popular fur bear, but they're really small. So there's not much fur, so they don't get very much. Despite the fact that they're considered and labeled common by many states, we really don't have much of an idea at all how common they are. The last fur sale of a long-tailed weasel in Tennessee was several years ago, to my knowledge. So TWRA, their numbers are low, and we don't have enough data to know how low they are. And this is the case in many states, from Tennessee to a friend of mine, Mike Connor, is a graduate of this program. He's the head of research at the Jones Research Center in southern Georgia, and he says they say down in Georgia they're common, but we don't have any evidence they are, and I think there's a strong reason to believe that they might be declining. We just don't know, and they're super hard to monitor. There's so few. I've seen some discussion of efforts to monitor them with dogs, to monitor their presence with dogs. They tried with trap arrays and trail cameras during the early years of the SWAT program, and just hardly any states got hardly any records, so there's just very few. But that said, their distribution is throughout the United States and on down into Mexico, a little bit up into the boreal forest. They're a little bitty, 1/4 pound up to a pound. Polygamous, half a dozen young, generalists. They eat rodents. They'll eat rabbits, but the next one gets even better. Okay, they're considered common, but females delay implantation, and the weasels are considered just vicious predators. This is the next one, which is the least weasel, which is the smallest member of the carnivore family in North America, I believe. Okay, so it's tiny. We have it in East Tennessee, but not in the rest of the state. And too, in the northern part of its range, can turn white. And so you see that it's widely distributed in the northern hemisphere throughout the world. Drops down in the Appalachians into as far as Tennessee, maybe even northern Georgia. 1/10 to 2/3 of a pound. They're about 1 foot long, including the tail. So a body like the size of a gerbil, plus the tail. They're polygynous, half a dozen young. They eat small rodents, and they too are considered common within their range, but I don't know how common. They occupy abandoned rodent burrows, is how small they are. So these are tiny, right? The smallest carnivore, fierce hunter, the short-tailed. Okay, we don't have, the third weasel in North America is the short-tailed weasel. We don't have them in Tennessee, okay? We have the long-tailed and the least, all right? The short-tailed is also called a stoat. It's also called an ermine. An ermine is a short-tailed weasel in that white winter coat, in that white winter phase. Having said that, there are some people who will call any weasel in that white winter phase an ermine, okay? There's geographical variation and jargon kind of comes in play And it too is across Canada and Eurasia. So Eurasia has the short-tailed and the least.
I know how to open a Sherman box trap after it's already been closed. We would trap like our jumping mice in the traps, and then the weasels would there would be one we'd set up and because we were pit tagging them and stuff.
Uh-huh.
And so we'd all be set up in a circle, and a weasel would come down and literally circle us, trying to get into our traps.
Really?
To take them, yeah.
What do you know? Was it a short-tailed weasel? Do you
I don't know what kind it
I
was,
bet it was,
but
that's really
obviously
cool.
it was in Arizona.
Right, right.
But yeah, we had videos of it. It would sneak down from the woods because we'd be set up on a fence line, and then it'd literally make circles around us, and we'd all be holding the traps like this because they'll literally push their way, push open, the
Right,
metal
the door,
flap that's
yeah.
already closed.
Yeah.
Push open and get in there and eat whatever's in there.
Wow.
Obviously, we didn't want them eating,
Yeah.
endangered species.
Right,
but
right.
Yeah, they've trapped them in Shermans before because they'll go in after the rodents
Yeah,
that are
yeah.
already trapped in there.
That's pretty good. Yeah, that's funny. Interesting, fun little animals, those weasels. Yeah. Of course, the mink is much more common than Mustela bison. The weasel is kind of a broad distribution, but like the river otter, the mink are usually more associated with streams and rivers. Okay, with water, aquatic furbearers. They're more in the eastern North America. They do get out into the northern Rockies and throughout Canada and Alaska. Not the western United States much, and not south of there at all.
We saw one at the ranch this summer in the desert, kind of weird. In Washington, southeast Washington, there was one in one of the irrigation ditches.
That's really interesting. You would have been, that would have been considered not kind of marginally in the range, maybe almost a little out of the range. So.
Yeah, I had to put it in reverse and drive back and look.
Yes, that is right. That's pretty fun. 1.5 to 3 pounds. It's it's bigger than a weasel, but a lot smaller than an otter. They're promiscuous. Okay, 4 to 5 young, stream size. They're generalists, carnivores. They're pretty common in some areas. They've been reduced by habitat loss. They too have been affected by water pollution, like river otters, as well as diseases. Mink in the northeastern United States have been farmed for their fur, and in several of those farming operations, anytime you put them in a farm, you're increasing the chance of disease. So a disease called transmissible mink encephalopathy. Does that sound a little bit familiar?
Nope.
A prion disease.
A lot of words.
Encephalopathy, TSC, transmissible spongiform encephalopathy is what CWD is a form of, or mad cow disease, or scrapian sheep. This is in mink. So it's been found in some of those mink farms in the Northeast.
So there's still mink farms in the north?
I don't know. States have their own rules, so some states might have outlawed them because of that, and other states might not have, and that's all happened on their own schedules, so I don't know what the current status is. Sorry about that.
I'm sure somebody selling was pets.
Probably, yeah. Mink are neat. I mean, sometimes in areas where rivers get a lot of river traffic, mink become habituated to humans. Has anybody canoed the Buffalo River and saw mink along the side of the river eating what's that? The duck? Yeah, just eating a crayfish, watching you. I've been able to canoe up within 10 feet of mink on multiple occasions. Okay, so this is our other skunk. When people, we often, group squirrels or rabbits or skunks, but we need to remember there are multiple species of each of these. This eastern spotted skunk, Spirogel putorius, has a different genus. It's in a different genus than the striped skunk, so do keep that in mind. It's not as common, it is declining. It's present largely throughout the United States, except the Great Lakes and New England states. It does dip down into Mexico, so this is a more southern species than the striped skunk, okay? 1 to 2 pounds, polygamous, 4 to 5 young, forest edges, stream sides, abandoned home sites, rock outcrops, places like the Cumberland Plateau where you see, or if you're more familiar with southern Illinois, where you've got places like Garden of the Gods or the giant city state park where you've got those big rock outcroppings. Ecologists call them, do you remember what ecologists call those from another class? What's that?
Or no, rock houses?
Rock houses, yeah. So they often will use habitat around those types of formations. They're somewhat uncommon in many states. They're being listed as a GCN species. What's GCN?
Various conservation.
Good things, okay. They can climb trees, unlike a striped skunk, which is pretty cool. They can run a little bit faster than a striped skunk. They have a threat display where they stand on their front feet with their back feet in the air, like, I will spray you, I'm not afraid to, which is really cool. Spotted skunks, the smell, it's mustelidae, it's a must, comes from two chemical compounds called thiols, okay? In spotted skunks, they have 3 thiols instead of 2. So some people suggest that they are more aromatic, or whatever you want to call it, than a striped skunk is. They all smell pretty strong. Okay, Procyon lotor, a species that I love and hate, both, is of course one of our most common fur bearers. Ubiquitous throughout the lower 48 states, except a little bit of the desert southwest, but it goes south. It's a more southern species. It doesn't go as far. 8 to 20 pounds. Actually, I've seen them more than 20 pounds. I've seen closer to 30 pounds. Polygynous, 2 to 5 young. They're generalists. They're omnivores. They're common. They're popular game species. They're a significant pest species of all sorts of stuff.
I've got a family member that likes to feed a family of coons,
Oh, yeah.
and they're so fat they waddle.
Yeah, they will. They will. They have a high tolerance for human habitation, so they will just park on your back deck and eat all your bird seed, or knock on your door if you go to visit Gatlinburg, and press and look in the window and look what you got. Give me your food. Come
I've seen
on.
that video of that guy on YouTube. His whole thing is he feeds raccoons, and he just sits there in a chair with a big bucket of hot dogs, and they just come up on him.
That is, yeah. Okay. Raccoons. They're really a fascinating find. Possum, Virginia possum, our one marsupial, Didelphis virginiana, is a really interesting species in a lot of different ways. So some things about it. It's a more southern species, the eastern United States and into Mexico. It doesn't go very far north. Interestingly, it has been introduced into the western United States. And I want to tell you a funny thing. So this right here is an old friend of mine named Vic Coggins. He's a biologist on my old study area in northeastern Oregon, over here, okay? Now, possums were introduced into the Willamette Valley up around Portland over here, but not over here in eastern Oregon, okay? They're over here. This group of biologists includes this elderly gentleman here, named Ken Spidell, who 28 years ago was about to retire. He was around 68 years old. And Ken had a little double wide he lived in outside of the town of Enterprise, Oregon. And for whatever reason, he hated possums, just hated them. So Vic, who worked with Ken at this little town out in northeastern Oregon, every time that he had to go to the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife main office in Portland, he would stop every time he saw a roadkill possum and put it in the back of his truck. And when he got back to his office, they had a big walk-in freezer, and he put it in the freezer. And over the course of the year, every time that he was going to be driving by Ken Spidell's house, he would pick up one of those frozen dead possums from the freezer. When he drove by his house, he would just throw it out of the road in front of Ken's house. And so Ken, we'd see him a few days later, and Ken would say, I saw another roadkill possum. It's killing me. I can't. We have possums." And Vic's like, "There's no possums in Eastern Oregon, Ken. I don't know what you're talking about." And that went on for the 5 years that I was there. I mean, I think he probably dropped 20 possums right in front of Ken's house. Ken never got it, and this still might be doing it for a long time. It's very funny, but that doesn't have anything to do with anything that budget. 3/4 of a pound to 14 pounds. That's a lot of variation in the size of those things. We think that they're polygynous, but there's some studies that seem to indicate maybe there's something else, not sure. They can have a wide range in young, right? They're marsupials, so their young are tiny, right? They're very much, what's the term?
Altricial?
Altricial. They're very altricial. Yeah. Very altricial young, very, very naked and blind and helpless, and so hence they have the pouch, right, to protect it. Possum has more teeth than any other native North American mammal, 50 teeth. The females have 13 teats, 12 in a circle and one in the middle, like a bullseye. Just interesting. Just interesting. The males have a bifurcated penis, like a snake. Interesting. Just different than a lot of males. They have a very short life, 1 to 3 years. So they don't last long at all. We think of a mesomammal usually as living a little bit longer than that. These guys don't. They have a little bit lower body temperature than a lot of our other mesomammals. They consume ticks. So although they can have and carry diseases, usually they don't carry as many diseases or as frequently as other mesomammals, like raccoons. They can carry everything, but we don't see that many diseases in the possum. Okay, our big rodent. Is this the biggest rodent?
No.
Is it the biggest rodent somewhere?
North America?
Yeah, North America, but what's bigger?
Capybara.
Yeah, capybara is bigger in South
Oh,
America.
video of them things. I didn't realize just how big capybara. They're bigger than like huskies.
Like
They're
100
They got them at the
I was
Memphis
just
Zoo.
like, oh
Yeah,
my
they get big,
gosh,
yeah.
the things are huge. Anyways, squirrel and stuff.
But beavers can get pretty big. They range, of course, throughout the United States, the boreal forests of Canada, up into Alaska. Not so much in the desert Southwest, but widely distributed. Up to and over 55 pounds. This species grows throughout their life, as do their teeth. They keep on growing. They just keep on getting worn down. They're monogamous. Usually about half a dozen or so young. 3 or 4 is pretty common. Forested wetlands, of course, as we all know, they eat vegetation, and they have recovered from past heavy exploitation, from past trapping, and they're considered common and sometimes a pest today. And then the other little rodent, furbearer, that we have, much smaller, is Mngmt zibethicus, the muskrat. Notice that it has often a white muzzle, not always, but often a white muzzle, but black whiskers, okay? Because what I'm about to show you next has white whiskers. Go to the beaver. Dark muzzle, dark whiskers. White muzzle, dark whiskers. The next one's going to be white muzzle, white whiskers, okay? So the muskrat, about football sized, okay, pretty small little guy, very luxuriant fur. Most of the 48 states, Canada and Alaska, like the beaver, 1.5 to 4 pounds, monogamous. A lot of rodents are promiscuous. These guys are monogamous. 6 to 8 young, up to 3 litters per year. So they can be very R-selected. They can be very R-selected when the conditions are right. They live in streams and wetlands. They eat vegetation. They'll sometimes eat some aquatic vertebrates. The meat is actually very good, and in some areas of the Northeast, I think I've heard of like a muskrat festival where they cook and eat muskrat. But it's a dark meat. It's a very mild, tender meat, so it's really good if you get a chance to try it. And they're considered common. Of course, this is the non-native nutria, which has often a white muzzle and white whiskers. It's medium in size between a beaver and a muskrat, right? Introduced and called by the Cajuns koipu, and introduced into the southeastern United States and a few other patches in other places. So you see the Atlantic coast, northeast Tennessee, southeast Kentucky, and a little bit of the Pacific Northwest up there. So a few little spots here and there. But 11 to 20 pounds, so just right in the middle between a beaver and a muskrat. Polygynous, not monogamous like the beaver and the muskrat, but polygynous. 1 to 13 young, usually 4 or 5, can breed multiple times per year. Very R selected, right? So high potential to be an invasive species. Wetlands, stems of river plants, invasive exotic fur-bearer pest. They have a round tail but with a sharp blade. So whereas the beaver has a big paddle-shaped broad tail, the muskrat has a blade-shaped tail. These guys have a little bit more rounded tail than a muskrat, but otherwise shaped kind of like a muskrat. Okay. They have, and they don't seem to be able to handle cold very well. They're from South America, so that might be what limits their distribution, but global warming might facilitate their movement northward. They have nipples on their thighs, the females, it's been speculated so that maybe the young can feed while they're swimming in the water. So that's interesting. Okay, I made good time. This is my last slide, and I'm not going to give life histories on all these, but let's see how many of these you guys can name. Okay.
Can I move closer to the board?
What's that?
So can I move closer to the board so I can see them?
You can't see them? Okay, let me see if I can. Yeah, you can move closer. Of course you can. Wow, that's not what I wanted to do.
Like, put it there.
Hi Joe, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Here.
How do I make it?
You broke it.
I don't know. I don't know how to fix this now. I've got to just make it go back, and I don't know how. Sorry, you can just move closer if you want to. Let's start with an easy one.
Arctic fox.
Arctic fox, good. Okay, you can name these collectively, these two right here.
Some kind of fox.
A desert fox and a kit fox. Desert and kit fox, K-I-T, and I don't remember which is which. They look a little similar. Okay. You know this one?
Canalinks, circle. Have a circle?
I don't think so.
Awesome.
That's what it looks like.
We have ocelot, we have jaguarundi, we have serval, we have several spotted cats. I think that this one is an ocelot, but we do have several other spotted cats besides the jaguar. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. How about this one? Only in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, Lemmy.
Bigger.
Holy cow, it's that big.
Oh, it's that big?
It's not
It's
that.
not a marmot.
Think like a size of a muskrat. Mountain beaver.
Oh,
Mountain.
apple's on today.
There we go. Mountain beaver. Yeah, good. All right.
American badger.
Badger.
Badger. Ringtail cat, Southwest.
Honey badger. Or a
Not a
wolverine.
honey badger, but
Wolverine.
related. A wolverine. Wolverine.
Black-footed ferret.
Black-footed ferret. There's the short-tailed weasel, and not the fisher, but Martin. Yeah, with a kind of a buff-colored breast. Yeah, and otherwise chocolate.
So where do porcupines fall in all these categories?
They are not considered a fur bear because they have quills instead of fur. So,
So it's a small game.
That's a good question. I've never heard of a state that has hunting for porcupines.
Guys in New York, so they kill like a dozen a night.
Really?
I guess they have a season.
Okay.
Oh, I've got
I don't know.
They said they'll go out and kill like 12 or 14.
Wow, that's interesting. I don't know.